1 Kings. I'm going to hang out till the end of the year. And so there are 5 weeks to Christmas. It's crazy, isn't it? It is wild, man. This is the story of Elijah. This is the first time you've seen Chronicles, but this is the first time you hear of this most famous person in the Bible, Elijah. And there's not a lot about him, actually. But what he does is quite amazing, and there's something special about him. I'm not going to go into too much of that detail, but the word Elijah means Jehovah is my God. That's quite a nice name. Imagine Brett being, oh, don't laugh at my name, man. It's a hard name, that name. Imagine the identity you have is God is my God, Jehovah. He is my God. Imagine that. When people meet you, they say, hi, oh, I know who you are. You're identified by your name as a follower of God. And he was a prophet. He was known for someone who defended the worship of God. He was like quite a radical dude. And we'll pick this up as we go along over these next few weeks. But he also did some really amazing miracles. And in so many ways, he's like a forerunner of Jesus. So 1 Kings chapter 17, 1-7. Now Elijah the Tishbite, who was of the settlers of Gilead, said to Ahab. Now Ahab was a wicked king, an evil oak. Solomon had died, and there'd be a whole lot of stuff going on. Kings. They just got worse and worse and worse and worse. And now there's this guy. And he was like arch evil. And this is Elijah. Imagine this, eh? As the Lord, the God of Israel lives, before whom I stand, surely there shall be no rain, except by my word. And then the next verse says this, the word of the Lord came to Elijah, saying, go away from here and turn eastward and hide yourself by the brook of Cherith, which is east of the Jordan. It shall be that you will drink of the brook, and I have commanded the ravens to provide for you there. So you must understand, this is out of the blue. He has this word that he has got to present to this evil king. And so God's trying to get his people's attention. He's trying to get Ahab's attention. He's trying to get the people in the region's attention. He's trying to declare who he is. And so God goes, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll get these guys' attention. I'll dry up the water. And you know what happens when there's no rain? It's chaos. And as he says this, he speaks again to him. He says, now you need to listen to me, Elijah. You need to run. And you need to go to the brook of Cherith. And that's where I'll look after you. You can drink there, and I'll feed you. The birds will fly in, and they'll drop off. Take a lot. Uber flight. It's coming in. So he went and he did according to the word of the Lord, for he went and lived by the brook of Cherith, which is east of the Jordan. And the ravens brought him bread and meat in the morning, and bread and meat in the evening, and he would drink from the brook. And it happened after a while that the brook dried up. It's a bit of a bummer, eh? The Lord says this, go there and I'll look after you. And then it dries up. It dried up because there was no rain. It was inevitable that that river would dry up. You know, the word Cherith means to round up, to cut off. It means separation. That's what it means. You know, a lot happens in this space of our lives. A lot happens when the water runs out, when the river of our lives runs dry. A lot happens. Well, let me say it this way. A lot can happen in the space of our lives. A lot can happen in the space of our lives. This uncertain, this turbulent space of our lives, this brook of Cherith of our lives, when we're rounded up and when we're cut off and when we're separated and seemingly from everyone and everything. I know that feeling. I would imagine most of you know that feeling. When the river runs dry, when nothing makes sense, when we're simply trying to do our best to follow God and to obey His words, And then these uncertain, turbulent spaces appear in our lives that we have to go and live at the brook of Cherith. But when there are these uncertain times, when there is turbulence, when there is this feeling like we're cut off and we're separated from everybody, when we feel like we're at that very river that has run dry, there is the certainty of the call of God on our lives. When the river runs dry, there is the certainty of the call of God on our lives. Now, Elijah the Tishbite, who was of the settlers of Gilead, said to Ahab, as the Lord said, the Lord of Israel lives, before whom I stand, there will be no more rain. When I think of this statement, when I think of Elijah saying something like this, when it comes to the call of God on our lives, there's a little statement. It's from the Bible. It says this: obedience is better than sacrifice. Firstly, the call of God starts in our lives the moment we respond to the call of Jesus, follow me. And then we follow him by faith alone. I would imagine most of you sitting in this space heard the call of Jesus say, come follow me. And by simple blind faith, you started following Jesus. You started walking away from everything. I would imagine for most of us, we were in a place in our lives where the river had run dry. And it was in that place that Jesus comes to us and he says, come follow me. Very similar to this guy Elijah. He is doing what he is doing because he initially made a decision, I will follow God. Faith and grace. Man and God, father and child. Called to follow him. We're called to him, to know his words, to know his voice, to learn his ways. We're called as his. We're affirmed as his sons and daughters. The calling of God doesn't just happen in our lives. It's a process. It's on us, but we become increasingly aware of it. I don't know how old Elijah was, but he didn't just stand before Ahab and sprout this out of his mouth. Whatever moment he came to in his life to be able to prophesy to Ahab was because something had happened earlier in his life. He was following God. He knew who he was in relationship with God. He knew he was called to God. He knew he was called as God's. He was affirmed as his son. We are affirmed as God's sons and daughters. We are heirs of his kingdom. We're called to be his, chosen, set apart, holy, precious in his sight, a people of his presence. That's what the call of God is. It doesn't just happen any minute of our life. You go, oh, I know what I'm going to do for God. There's a build-up. We become increasingly aware that we've responded to his call, that we are his, that we're meant to be his. And part of his call is that we are set aside. We are following God is being set aside. Following Jesus is a radical step of obedience. One of the marks of being knowing that we are called as his is that we have a new rhythm for our lives. A new rhythm for life and living, which is marked by his grace. Not by religion. We don't come to Jesus and follow Jesus because there's a religious pattern we got to follow. There are rules or there are hoops we've got to jump through, or we've got to keep all these spiritual laws and follow the doctrines. We follow Jesus because he is a God of grace. He's come to set us free. He's come to make us whole so we can discover who he is in his fullness. The arrangement with God in us has always been being before doing. It's always been that. And forever, it's always been a people who will be before a people who will do. Following Jesus is following Jesus. That's what it is. It's being with Jesus. And as we look at Elijah, this unimaginable, daunting first God assignment of Elijah. Imagine that. Your first assignment was to stand before the evil king Ahab and tell him, there's going to be no rain until God speaks again. Until, in fact, you hear me speak God's words again. To prophesy to him. I think it was possible for him to do this. I think it was possible because Elijah knew his God. Looking at his life, it's obvious he knew his God, because when we see, and we'll look at it later, we see that he has the ability to discern God's voice amongst all the other voices going on. He has this capacity of faith to do incredible things for God. He knew God. The true story is this: none of us can do great things for God if we haven't spent quality time with God. None of us can do great things for God unless we've spent quality time with God. I've seen this. I've seen this in my life. I've seen it all over the place, where all of a sudden someone gets something in their heart, and I'm going to live out the will of God for my life. I'm going to follow the call of God. And it goes like this: up and then down. They do something amazing, but there's nothing within them that is able to sustain their life. They've responded out of a place of, I don't know if it's faith, maybe it's just zealousness. You see, the second key aspect of the call of God, exactly like this man Elijah, is faithfulness. Faithfulness is a key characteristic of the calling of God on our lives, being faithful stewards of the manifold grace of God. Faithfulness means being faithful with whatever He entrusts us with. Faithfulness. And Jesus has entrusted us with the keys of the kingdom. He said, I will build my church, but I'm going to give you the keys, Paige. I'm going to give you these keys. And what I need you to do is use the keys. But what do? I'll tell you, there'll be things you'll need to open. Will we be faithful with what God has entrusted to us? I believe faithfulness must be understood, as the scriptures teach it, as a fruit of the Spirit. It doesn't just happen. Faithfulness doesn't just happen. Faithfulness doesn't just appear on us like a pimple. Faithfulness is a result of something else. Think of our life as a tree. I know what type of tree you want to think yourself as this morning. I would like to think of myself as a tree that can bear some proper fruits. Choose your tree. I'm not going to go down that lane. But we all know this. Our roots produce the fruits. No roots. And this isn't fantastic. You got this. No roots, no fruits. And that's faithfulness. And we start being faithful with the small things. That's what Jesus taught in the parable at the end of Matthew 25. He gives us 1 talent, 2 talents, 5 talents, 10 talents. And then he says, go and use those talents for my name and for my kingdom's sake. And then he waits for us to come back. And he says to the one who has one and buried it and didn't use the talent, he says, you're just dumb. I've given you 1 talent. Use it for my glory. To the 2 talent who came back and said, look, I had 2. You gave me 2 and I used it. Now I've got 4. God goes, well done. You see, it starts with the little things. When I was a very young teenager, I found Jesus. I was a super zealous guy, I must be honest. I was super. I think I irritated everybody. I think I irritated God. And I wanted to do everything for Jesus. Didn't you want to just do everything? I wanted to do everything. I wanted to do everything I possibly could. But I was so shy when I came to telling people about Jesus. Then I got filled with the Spirit. Then I started learning to walk in the Spirit. And I started learning about what it is to be faithful with the little things He put in your hands. And so I felt the nudge of Jesus. Why don't you do this? And so my first area of practicing to be faithful was to try and tell someone about Jesus. So I told one person that didn't go down well, I must be honest. I told 2 people that never went down. A lot of the people I told about Jesus, they didn't really fancy the idea. But I kept at it. And then over the years, I started seeing what faithfulness can do when God puts something in your hands. And then it wasn't long, I started seeing 10s and 50s, and we started seeing hundreds of people coming to faith over the years. Faithfulness in the little things. What is God put in your hand that you need to be faithful with? What is it? What is that thing? Faithfulness is like your roots in your relationship with Jesus must go down deep in Him so that the fruit of faithfulness can continue to grow. The Bible tells us that God puts the spiritual gifts in our hands so that the people near and around us can experience God's love and power. He puts the spiritual gifts in our hands. The greatest gift is the gift of prophecy. No. Speaking in tongues. No. Miracles. Love. 4-letter word. Love. Be faithful in giving the gift of God's love to someone near you. What does it look like? I don't know what it looks like for you. Sometimes for me, it's helping someone across a road. Sometimes for me, it's feeding someone who's hungry. Sometimes for me, it's learning to be more patient. Very hard. Love. You shouldn't be looking at your husbands and wives like that. I saw that. Give away the gift of love and see what God does. I guarantee He'll start using the other gifts. I think something like that happened with the life of Elijah. Elijah prophesied. You don't just wake up and go, I'm going to prophesy this morning. I'm going to tell Durban there's going to be no rain. Check your weather app if you're going to do that. Imagine. But if you're walking faithfully with God and you learn to discern His voice and you've been exercising that gift every day of your life and seeing what God does when you're faithful with the small things, when it comes to say to a king, there's going to be no rain, you're pretty confident there's going to be no rain. Wouldn't it be great if we could get there? Elijah prophesied. 1 Peter 4 says this, as each one has received a special gift, use it to serve one another as stewards of the manifold grace of God. Did you hear that? I'm going to repeat it. See if you can pick it up. As each one has received a special gift, use it in serving one another as good stewards of the manifold grace of God. I think God's sneaky here. He's saying, why don't you practice with one another before you speak to the king and tell him there's going to be no rain? Why don't we exercise our spiritual gifts with one another? Why don't we serve one another and express the grace of God to one another? Whoever speaks is doing so as if they're speaking the utterances of God, and whoever serves is serving in the might of His power. Hey, Elijah prophesied, and he spoke the utterances of God. Faithfulness is a key to our calling. Faith in God alone is the key in our calling. What has God called you to? What is the calling of your life? Are you aware, like Elijah, fulfill the calling of God in his life? Are you aware? Are we aware that God has got a call on your life? Do you remember what Jesus said to the disciples? He said, come follow me. And the next breath He said, and I'll make you. Do you remember that? Come follow me and I'll make you fishers of men. Come follow me and I'll change the trajectory of your life. Come follow me. I've got a cause for you. Come follow me. Know me. You're for me. You're with me. You're meant to be with me. At the same time, you need to know this. I've got something that I need you to do for me. I will make you fishers of men. A call is on our lives. The moment you follow Jesus, it's a call to follow Him, but it's a call to advance His kingdom, to make His name known. The third aspect of the calling of God is our willingness to respond our willingness to be obedient to what God says, to be faithful, to step up and to step out, to do whatever He tells you to do whatever He tells you to do, whatever that is. That's crazy stuff, isn't it? How many of you have had those moments when the Lord has said to you, I want you to go and do this, and you thought, no ways. That is going to be so embarrassing. And then you never know what happens because you never go. I'm going to tell you a story. My friend Glenn Woodruff is an incredibly talented man. And he played Babington his whole life at every level you could imagine. And one of his young friends had a car accident and was in a coma. And Glenn got a phone call from the family, because it's a very close family of theirs, phoned them and said, our son is in a coma, and we're not too sure he's ever going to come out of it. So Glenn phoned me. He was like crying. He wasn't sure what to do. He said, what shall we do? I said, and I don't know if I should have said it, man. I said, let's go and pray for him. And I don't know if you know, there's a big hospital in Durban called Addington Hospital. So Glenn and I went to Addington Hospital. We went up to the men's ward, which was way up there in the clouds. And we walked in. There was absolutely no one in the ward. It was quiet, because those were serious people in here. And we found the guy I think it was his nephew actually, was lying on the bed with all the pipes and monitors and screens and everything going on. And we asked for a nurse. Hey, is anybody here? We looked down the passage, couldn't find anybody. It was like quite weird, but there he was. And we were on assignment. So we don't really know what to do. Glenn's on this side of the oak. I'm on this side. Glenn's looking at me with big eyes like this. I'm going, well, I'm doing a pastoral call today. I'm going to go, I pray the Lord bless you and keep you. And then I'm going to run out of there fast. And my one eye is looking at the monitor all the time. And then the second thing I shouldn't have said was to Glenn, why don't we lay hands on him? So Glenn took one hand, I took one hand, and I prayed this prayer, simple prayer. Now, I didn't want to be there, you must understand. I prayed this simple prayer. Lord, we just pray that you would touch Chris. And as we put our hands on his chest, the monitor went crazy. And I thought, we have just killed this guy. He could have lasted 10 months in a coma, and we have just murdered a friend. So we let go, looked out the passage, and bolted. I got a phone call from Glenn. I didn't want that phone call. I got a phone call from Glenn the next morning to say Chris had got out of bed and had gone home. Thank you, Jesus. It's crazy, eh? Elijah standing before Ahab and tells him there's going to be no rain. You don't do that unless you know the one who tells you to do that. And I want to tell you something. If you know Jesus, He does have an assignment for you. Your first assignment, your second, it doesn't matter. He has called us to make His name known. And we need to walk in faith and grace. And we just need to be faithful in our relationship with Him. And fruit will bear in our lives. Watch it happen. Just hang out with God. And then we need to be faithful to do whatever He tells you to do. Even if it doesn't make sense. Have a go. I could keep you here for days telling you of all the crazy things that God has done. And there's nothing special. I can ask Leanne. There's nothing special about me at all. It's just that, like all of us, we know the one who has called us. Why wouldn't we do what He's called us to do? And who knows the thing that He set aside for you in the life of other people could change them forever. So let me help you understand how calling works and what it looks like. I will say this: we never walk alone. I can tell you why we say this. God is always with us. He's promised to be with us. He said, Lorraine, He'll never leave us. He'll never abandon us. He'll never turn His back on us. My Spirit will be with you. You'll never be orphaned. I'm here. I'll not only comfort you, I'm going to help you through this life. I'm going to empower you to live the life that my Father has called you to live. We will never walk alone. And He anoints us. Like He anointed Elijah, He anoints us through His Spirit with His power and authority so we can do the thing God's called us to do, so we can fulfill our call. There is no way on planet Earth any of us can fulfill the call of God except by His might, except by His Spirit. We do this by faith in Him. He does it. And if you are a believer in Jesus and you believe that His Spirit lives in you, then you're on the ride of your life. Maybe you don't know it yet. And the true story is this: there is no higher calling than the one you've responded to right now. I remember Quinton, at the worst, his river ran dry. At the worst, one of the worst moments of his life, not knowing what to do. And then he said, why don't we start an online theological uni? And today we have an unbelievable space for young men and women to be trained in theology, and it's going crazy. It's amazing because he stepped out in faith and he used his gift, because he's a teacher. He used his prime gift to honor the Lord. Lord, here I am, you use me. And now we have 3 years up and more than 100 students, something like that. Amazing. God has a call on your life. He just needs you to follow Him. He just needs you to be faithful and be willing to step out. There's nothing higher. There's no higher calling than the one you've responded to, the one you've been obedient to, the one you're living out right now, the one you will risk for God. But most importantly, regarding the call of God on your life is humility. Having a Christ-like attitude for our lives and for His ministry. When we're faced with the challenges of life, when the river runs dry. And in the world we live in, and I'll tell you why I'm saying this. Because the world we live in is absent of selflessness. In the world we live in, and in the church world we live in, promotion and acknowledgement and signs of our names and our fame, and that we could have a blog and we could have something else, whatever they're called out there on the line, that the world would know how important we are and what a wonderful revelation we have of God. God doesn't want us to be famous. He wants faceless people. Humility says this: it's not me, Lord, but you, Lord. You know, Elijah could have said, I'm the mighty prophet of God. There's going to be no rain. Watch my God provide for me. Uber Eats will come swooping in. He didn't. He ran. He was petrified. He ran and he hid. And then he drank from the brook. And God provided in his fear and in his anxiety. And you'll see, it was that guy. Don't think people who follow the call of God are super brave people. They're most probably the most anxious people. Do nothing from selfless and empty conceit, but with humility of mind regarding one another as more important than yourselves. Don't merely look out for your own personal interests, but also for the interests of others. Have this attitude in yourself, which is also in Jesus, who, although He existed in the form of God, did not regard equality with God a thing to be grasped, but He emptied Himself, taking the form of a bond servant, a slave, choosing to be a slave. Listen to what Jesus says. And hearing this, the 10 became indignant with James and John. You know why they became indignant with James and John? Because his mother came up to Jesus and said, Jesus, you know my kids are good. They're ace kids. They're going to get certificates at the end of this time. But is it possible if one can sit on your left and one can sit on your right? Because then they can really, they're seen with the big guy. And then promotion is easy then. And the other oaks are furious. They're going, they're mad because their mom never stepped up for them. And then Jesus said, you know that those who are recognized as rulers of the Gentile lord it over them. And the great men exercise authority over them. But it is not this way among you. But whoever wishes to become great among you shall be your servant. And whoever wishes to be the first among you shall be your slave of all. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for all. There is no elite position in the church that Jesus builds. None at all. When it comes to God's calling, it's servant. That's what it is. When God calls you to his first assignment, Elijah, this is what you need to do. You need to be my servant here. You have to represent me. And he did. When God makes you aware, when you become acutely aware that you have a call on your life, humility is the key. Humility is the key. And the recognition that there is no fame in this for me. Listen to what Paul writes to the Corinthians. He says, then what is Apollos? They're fighting over who's famous. Is Apollos more important in the Corinthian church than Paul? Apollos is a great speaker and Paul is this great leader. But who's important? And Paul says this, then what is Paul and what is Apollos? Servants, through whom you believed, even as the Lord gave opportunity to each one. I planted, Apollos watered, but God causes the growth. So then neither one who plants or the one who waters is anything, but God is the one who causes the growth. Now the one who plants and he who waters are the same, but each will receive their reward according to their labor. There is no rank in God's kingdom, no rank at all. What is the call of God on your life? You can't just follow Jesus and come to church on a Sunday. You can't just follow Jesus and go to Bible study in the week. If you follow Jesus, you have a call on your life. What does that look like? Is it so that you'll be in the medical world and fulfill God's plan there? Is it that you'll be in the technological world and fulfill God's plan there? In the police, as a teacher, headmaster, as a student? What's God's call on your life? It doesn't matter what you do. It matters, will you do what he wants you to do with where you are? Wherever your feet are, will you fulfill God's call on your life? Will you use the gifts of God? And that's a great way to discover what your call is. Exercise your gifts. I think I shared this story. Leanne and I have been to many conferences around the world. One conference we're most impacted was in Chicago, and it was winter, and it was snowing, and there was a massive conference for 4,000 or 5,000 people, like a few in a row in a week. And we went to the one, and we were driving through the parking. It was like an airport parking, just thousands of cars and sleet and rain, and there was a big tall guy with a big hand, and he was waving with the biggest smile on his face with like icicles hanging out his nose. And we got into the auditorium, and we all got warmed up and had our cocoa, and the door opened, and in walked this tall guy, and he was freezing. He was blue. I would have thought he was a Smurf, but he was 6'6". And the guy leaned over to me, one of the hosts there leaned over and said, that guy that just walks in is CEO of one of the biggest banks in Chicago. I thought, wow, here's a man who wants to fulfill his call in life. He's a CEO of one of the biggest banks in Chicago. And there he is in the snow, freezing, helping people find a place so they can run in and get warm cocoa or something. You know, I believe that man fulfilled his calling while God promoted him, got that job, is because he was exercising his gifts. He was humbling himself in the sight of God. He was training himself so he could be faithful with God, with what God entrusted to him. And that at any moment, when a door opened in his CEO position, he would step into that space and make God known. That story has never left my mind. The call of God is on you today. And I would imagine there's some amazing things that God wants to do in and through your life. Will you do it? Will you be an Elijah? Nearly said an Elijah. Or an Elijah. Will you be that person? Will you say, Lord, I'm following you. I'm yours. I know you. I'm going to hang out with you. I'm going to make sure my roots go down. I'm going to be a fruitful follower of Jesus in every area of my life. I want to be faithful. I'm going to learn, Lord, to push myself aside. I'm going to learn the art of humility so that when you tell me to step out and do the thing you call me to do, there's nothing in the way. I'll do it because I'm your servant. I will do it even if it's stupid. I'm going to do it because you never know what happens. Someone could come out of a coma. Someone could get out of a grave. Someone's life could turn around. Marriage could be restored. A young person could find hope. Amen?